Let's begin.
Hello and welcome to Pods Above Replacement, part of the Padres Hot Tub Podcast Network. My name is Raphie Cantor. I am the producer of Padres Hot Tub, and joining me from the Mile High City, he's my number one overall pick. It's John Precoda.
Thanks, Raphie. You know, the Padres are trying to race themselves into the number one pick next year as well.
Yeah, I mean, good thing they put that lottery in there just when we started sucking again. Really grateful for that. Something I advocated for profusely. Well, if you haven't figured it out by now, John and I are going to be talking about the draft, specifically how the Padres have fared in the MLB draft during the AJ Preller regime, and we will dig into that in a moment. But first, we got some housekeeping to take care of. First of all, as always, we're going to remind you, please watch this on YouTube. You are truly not getting the full experience of the show if you're not watching on YouTube right now. If you're in your car, do not watch us on YouTube. Pull over, get off of the freeway, take the exit, sit in the drive-thru line at McDonald's, have us on your phone there. But if you're home, if you're doing whatever, please pull this up on YouTube. You will get the full experience, especially because we're going to be throwing out lots of names and numbers associated with the draft, some draft boards, etc. It'd be very helpful to have a visual aid. As always, please subscribe. We slowly climbing up those charts, finding new people here and there every week. But so we really appreciate you guys coming and joining and being a part of this community. The ultimate way to be a part of this community is by becoming a patron at patreon.com/PadresHotTub. The Pods Above Replacement channel is going to be as active as AJ Preller's phone inquiring about trade value for Ha-Sung Kim in just a few weeks. So, that's to say very active. It's been very active in there. So come and hang out. And last little bit of housekeeping, we are going to be off next week. This is our first week off that we've taken as a show. And it is not for the All-Star break, even though it is kind of coinciding with that. I will be on my honeymoon. So I'm very excited about that. Thank you. Thank you for the applause, audience of one. I really appreciate it. Standing up. So without further ado, let's get to talking about the draft. And just to before I toss it over to John, to get a brief overview of what we're going to be going through in this episode. Basically, we're going to be going year by year from 2015, which is the first year that AJ Preller was in control of the draft, until this past draft in 2022. And we're going to evaluate the draft. And we're also going to compare ourselves to the Dodgers in that sense. And I'm playing the anti-Dodger loving trap card that right now people are in the comments and going to say this is Dodger loving. It's not. They are our benchmark. They are our premier division rival. And they have one of the best player development programs in Major League Baseball. It's constantly touted. I don't need to tell you this. If you listen to the show, you know this by now. But that is why they are being referenced constantly in this episode, because really they have something that we should be aspiring to. And something that, when we talk about the deficiencies of this team consistently, player development and, not necessarily a draft, but player development is something that, we constantly harp on. And it turns out once you draft players, it's not like the NBA or the NFL where they're, fully baked in the easy bake oven and you can just stick them onto your squad. It takes some time. So without further ado, John, if you could take us through a map. We're looking at a map on screen. I don't know if it's a map that belongs in People Live in Cities, which do you know that subreddit, by the way? People Live in Cities? Oh, it's the best. It's the best. Really quickly, it's a collection of maps. It's like, here's the collection of 5G cell towers in the United Kingdom, and here's a map of where all the COVID infections were. Coincidence? And it's just like, yeah, they're maps of people live in cities. You know what I mean? Like, it's always really funny where people are trying to draw these lines. So anyway, if you could please take us through this map that we're looking at right now of what exactly, John?
It's on Major League players, just where they were when they were drafted prior, like 2021 and prior. And it kind of is a little bit of a people live in cities, although it's more people live in like cities closer to the equator because it's where the baseball hotspots are, which tend to
Sun
be
Belt, baby.
these around, the Sun Belt. And so you can see on the map, it's like SoCal, the San Diego, LA area is just like a big, huge, dense dot. That's like more than all the other darkness on the map combined is that SoCal hotbed of baseball prospects. And there's another one kind of in NorCal, East Texas, and Southern Florida as well. It was funny to me to look at this and just, you can kind of pick where AJ Preller's career is going to go, I think, based on this. Like, started off in East Texas, now he's in the SoCal belt, so he can do all his scouting as a GM and professional baseball operations. If we ever fire him, it looks like he'll probably go to like San Francisco area or maybe Southern Florida. But it's I mean, he's going to the right places. If his dream is scouting players, which that's what it seems to be, he's been in the right spots.
Yeah. All I'm seeing on this is East Coast, pull your fucking weight. All I hear about is East Coast bias constantly. East Coast is so great, blah, 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 blah. I'm looking at this, like, honestly, kind of mid. I agree. And I mean, mind you, it does snow there a lot.
There's excuses for everything.
Yes, excuses, exactly. So without further ado, let's get to the very first draft Padres had with AJ Preller in 2015. I want to set the scene. That's baseball era in San Diego has just ended. Bud Black has been dismissed after AJ Preller, who would soon be dubbed teardown artist by Grantland.com, for what he did prior to the 2015 season to try and basically expedite the Padres rebuild and jumpstart it and kind of doom them into a top heavy team. Those words hurt to say out loud. This is the first draft that he has at his control, and it's basically the Padres are on their way to engaging in a half-decade long rebuild. In this draft, some of the notable selections, their first pick, which was not a first-round pick, was their second pick, was Austin Smith, who never
first
made
pick of the Preller era. Austin Smith, everybody, mark that down in your trivia book.
Right-handed pitcher. Did not make it to the major leagues. His first pick that did make it to the major leagues was one Jacob Nix. Remember Jacob Nix, John?
Yeah, he was he climbing through the doggy door, or was that
I think he was climbing through the doggy door, wasn't he? I hope we're not like slandering someone.
Yeah,
if you want to confirm, I'll vamp while you confirm if he's the doggy door guy. But Jacob Nix put up negative.
It is.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay. Do you want to tell the story?
And arrested after allegedly crawling through a doggy door. Yeah. So apparently, I think Tom Cosgrove. Yeah, Tom Cosgrove ended up being with him, which is something
really?
Pointed out on the. Yeah, somebody pointed that out to me on the Discord. I'm sorry that I don't remember who it was. I'll try to give them credit sometime later. But yeah, Jacob Nix and Tom Cosgrove apparently were like drunk on the way back from a spring training game, and then at around 3:30 a.m. they thought that a Airbnb that they were renting was theirs, when in fact it was like the next door neighbors or somewhere close, and they were trying to get in because they thought they locked themselves out. So Jacob Nix, who's like 6'7" or something like that, tried to sneak his way through the doggy door, and then ended up being like kicked in the face and then tased and then and then arrested while Tom Cosgrove ran away.
So that, my friends, was AJ Preller's second ever pick as the general manager of the Padres. He put up negative 0.4 F4. By the way, we're gonna get back to this when we talk about when we get back to Cosgrove. Remind me, because this is gonna come back up because he was drafted by the Padres. Sorry to spoil that. But just to kind of take you through the Padres drafts, and then I'll hand the Dodgers one to you, John. Some notable selections in that they eventually did make the major leagues with the Padres. Austin Allen, Brett Kennedy, Trey Winginter, and Phil Maton were all taken in this draft. And all the way down in the 34th round, with the 1017th pick in the draft, Aztec for life, Ty France was taken. This was not a pick that was seen to really be of any significance at the time, certainly. I think it was sort of like a hometown pick. Say, hey, this guy was a good Aztec, like whatever. Let's see if he turns into anything. He did turn into something, but not for us, John. So during this draft, there was also some folks like Trevor McGill who were picked, who would go on to make the major leagues, but not for us. And so what John and I wanted to do was kind of break down each year and say, okay, this is how much these players that were drafted by the Padres generated for the Padres, how much WAR, how much value they generated, and here's how much they generated for other teams. And the reason that we want to go about it this way is it shows two things. The total amount of WAR, the gross WAR that's generated from these players, shows AJ Preller and company's skill just at talent evaluation from a draft perspective. But then how much value they generate for us as opposed to other teams shows how well we know what that value is and how well we, develop that value, et cetera, et cetera. So the 2015 draft for the Padres generated negative 0.1 F4 for the team. Okay. And for other teams, largely on the back of Ty France's 7 F4 he's put up for the Seattle Mariners, he has generated, these players have generated 9.5 F4 for other teams. So negative 0.1 F4 for us in the 2015 draft, and for other teams, 9.5 F4. And John, how does that compare to the Dodgers in 2015?
Oh God! Before I even get into the Dodgers, I haven't looked it up quite yet because I just thought of it just now. But Ty France putting up 7.0 F4 primarily at the first base position for the Mariners. That's gotta be more total F4 than like the Padres in total from first base from like 2010 till now. I would.
Yeah, I believe that.
So like 2010 is when we like last had Adrian Gonzalez, and then Eric Hosmer in his tenure I think had almost 0.0. Will Myers probably had like a few WAR. I don't even know who else.
It's close.
In the early.
It's close.
I bet you that's more than first base is our new shortstop.
Yeah.
AJ Preller was like, yeah, we haven't had a good shortstop in years, so I'm gonna get infinite shortstops, and then now first base is just a black hole. But 7 F4 from first base, man, that sounds pretty nice right now. In 2015, so these 2015 and 2016 years are kind of the very, very dark ones when you compare yourselves to the Dodgers, at least. The Dodgers ended up having a few players that went to the major leagues, but in reality, this draft was almost entirely well stocked on their part by the draft pick of Walker Buehler in the first round, 24th overall. He was like, that year he was coming off Tommy John surgery, so he was like a guy that probably should have been drafted earlier. It's basically the model that we used to draft Dylan Lesko this past year, but it obviously worked out for them. He ended up getting 15.1 F4 so far for the Dodgers, and is still on his arbitration year. So like all of that is for a very cheap amount of money. And then in terms of other players that like made the major leagues, Edwin Rios made it. Matt Beatty, former famous Padre.
We'll get back to him later. Don't you worry.
We will. The Kyle Garlick, who I think had like a hot spot for a second, ended up making it. But for your little calculation of like how many WAR that draft class generated for their team, it ended up being 16.5 WAR, which is obviously more than negative 0.01 or 0.1 WAR. And then in terms of the people that they ended up shipping away, they ended up getting negative 1.7 WAR. So they knew which players were good. It was mostly just Walker Buehler, but they didn't trade anyone away that ended up biting them in the ass afterwards from that draft. In fact, Matt Beatty, who we will get to later, put up negative 0.7 WAR on the San Diego Padres. So we were the ones that ended up taking their kind of negative value from that draft class.
Yeah, I mean, again, you said it's mostly on the back of Walker Buehler, and it is 15.1 F4 of the 16.5 from that draft class. But it only takes one, John. It just takes one. It just takes one guy to make a draft successful. And we'll get into this as we go on, but it's kind of telling that there is no just one guy for the Padres. So moving on to 2016, this was the year that the Padres in the very first round took Cal Quantrill from Canada. He was, I think, is it the eighth or not? He was the eighth pick overall.
Eighth pick, yeah.
This was a draft in which we took some folks like Eric Lauer, Buddy Reed, who I used to be super stoked on at some point. Hudson Potts was another notable prospect we had. Reggie Lawson, Eric Lauer, former Padres opening day starter. Eric Lauer, Mason Thompson, Churv God, Joey Lucchesi, and way down the list, David Bednar was taken in this draft in the 35th round. So in terms of the WAR generated by the Padres in this draft, it was a pretty good one, I have to say, actually. 7.8 F-WAR. This was the pretty much only draft class where the window, you typically think it's a 3 to 5 year window from the time you draft guys to the time they come and make an impact on the team, depending on their readiness. And this was 2016 was early enough in the Preller regime that he hadn't really started trading guys away yet by the time these guys came to the majors. They were amongst the people that were first traded away, but they got, in 2019, this was a year that we had Eric Lauer pitching for the Padres. We had Joey Lucchesi pitching for the Padres. We didn't quite have Cal Quantrill, I think, in 2019. So in this year so far, I guess none of these guys are on the Padres anymore, so not so far. 7.8 F-WAR generated from the Padres from this draft. For other teams, though, they generated 15.3 F-WAR. There's one name I haven't mentioned yet that was picked in this draft, and that's Jack Sawinski, who at the time of our recording of this just homered off of the Padres, which was ultra sweet. So for us, Yesterday, yeah. Cal Quantrill generated 1.4 F-WAR for us, but so far for the Cleveland Guardians, he's generated 4.7. Eric Lauer, this surprised me, has generated less WAR for the Brewers than he has for us. He's generated 3.1 F-WAR for the Padres and 2.1 for the Brewers. Mason Thompson's basically been nothing. Joey Lucchesi as well, 3.3 for us, only 0.7 for the Mets. But for the Pirates in Pittsburgh, David Bednar, this was one that just kind of came out of nowhere. 4.1 F-WAR as a reliever that David Bednar has generated for the Pirates. And then, of course, as we mentioned, Jack Sawinski coming in with 3.1 F-WAR, playing center field occasionally right field, depending on what they need, for the Pittsburgh Pirates. So, you get the honors, John. Do you want to do the Dodgers again?
Sure, but I do want to comment on this draft as a whole. Cal Quantrill was also coming off an injury, not unlike Walker Buehler, and we still drafted him 8th overall. And at the time, it sounded like, he was more of like a 20th overall, maybe 25th overall, kind of in that same injury like portion of the draft that Walker Buehler was drafted. And maybe we were going to get him under slot, and that was going to help us pay for, some of these younger players afterwards. And it turned out he signed up for overslot. So, we got an injured pitcher who was, not ranked amongst the top prospects at the time, drafted him higher than everybody thought, and then paid him more than slot for some reason. It was just a strange pick at the time. It did end up working out pretty well. I mean, not for us, but for the Guardians. But it was just like a strange pick, and then it kind of maybe ended up making us not be able to sign some of the folks lower on, like JJ Bleday, who ended up being a top overall pick. He was in the top, I think, top 6 draft picks a few years later. We didn't sign him out of high school. One wonders whether we might have been able to if we had, signed Cal Quantrill under slot. But yeah, interesting draft. Going to the Dodgers in 2016 is something that will make you want to put a knife through your head. It is. It was not the most amazing single draft class that I came across in my research so far, but it was certainly one of them. They had in that draft just an embarrassment of riches. From that draft alone, they got Gavin Lux in the first round. So, okay, before I even get into this, I do want to point out that we, as an organization, for the entirety of this like era, have had compensation picks that the Dodgers didn't have. So every year we get basically either a free first round pick, it's usually in like the 32 to 38 range, or a free second round pick, which is right after the second round, that the Dodgers just don't have, which is like our compensation A picks every other year are almost as valuable as their first overall picks because they're constantly towards the end of the first round. So that's just something that we get for free. And we're comparing ourselves to the Dodgers, who one pick at the end of the draft every year, and 3 times out of this, session of years that we're going to go over, just didn't even have a first round pick because they signed players. We only signed players that first year. And we're comparing ourselves to them, but we have a lot more resources in the draft. So that's just a preface to this. But anyways, they got Gavin Lux, Will Smith, Tony Gonsolin, and Dustin May all in one season in the draft, which is just, oh my God. That's like 4 like very good players that are going to be like basically free going forward that they got all in one single draft. And like a lot of these are not like Dustin May was a 3rd round pick. Tony Gonsolin ended up being a 9th round pick. I didn't even say that they also got Dean Kramer, who like has ended up putting up plenty of WAR for the Orioles, but it's like, oh my God. So Lux has put up 4.4 WAR, Smith has put up 14.2, May 3.4, Gonsolin 6.4, and all of them have a lot more controllable years that are going to put up a lot more than the 28.9 FWAR that they've put up so far. 28.9 FWAR just for the Dodgers, and then another 8.4 FWAR for other teams, mostly led by like Dean Kramer, Zach McKinstry, who put up negative WAR for them, but then put up 2.2 out on the major league roads. But so combined that year, they put up about as much WAR as we have from 2015 to now, which is just like, oh my gosh. How we were debating off screen before this whether you would just trade all of the AJ Preller drafts for the 2015 and 2016 Dodgers drafts. What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would. I mean, yeah, yes is the answer. Now, this is another thing that we had talked about it before we started recording. Like, do these players become the players they become if they're in the Padres organization? And I would say almost undoubtedly they do not become the players that they are now. I think
isn't that worse?
Yeah, of course it's worse. We're in the upside down, John. Like it's like we've been sold a bill of goods. I don't know. Like, we'll get in. Let's save our critique for the end, I guess, because we got some more drafts to get through. Yeah, and then just to note, like, they have given away 8.4 FWAR, the Dodgers, from this draft. That's still a difference of over 20 WAR, so I wouldn't even be thinking about this if I were them. And really, like, that only changed because Luke Raley has become incredible in Tampa Bay, and that's just this year. And you can say the same thing about Dean Kramer in Baltimore. And they traded away Zach McKinstry to the Cubs, and that wasn't a surprise. I think that like he was like a 45 or 50 value player. Like he was someone who was going to provide value like wherever he went. They did so knowingly. So I don't think that the Dodgers are all that sweating about giving away those 8 WAR. Let's move on to 2017 because it started some really, really interesting discussion. So for the Padres, this was the Mackenzie Gore draft. This was he was picked 3rd overall. High school pitcher, everyone talking about that he had these beautiful mechanics, that gorgeous leg kick that we all became so enamored with when we were deep in the hole of a rebuild, and Javi Guerra was playing shortstop or whatever. And so he was at the top, but immediately after him, Luis Campusano, who is really one of the only premier prospects of these draft class to graduate with the Padres and still remain on the team. So, and obviously the book is yet to be written on him. He just eclipsed a year of service time. He's been injured for a lot of that. And he's provided the team with negative 0.8 F4 in value, which shocked me. Like I knew he had a slow start, but I didn't know it was that bad. Like over those 3 seasons that he's been here for cups of coffee here and there. But in terms of value that was provided to the team, like I said, we got Gore, we got Campusano. I'm going to bring up a name that we haven't brought up on this show yet. You remember Nick Margavicic?
Nick Margavicic. Yes, I do remember him. I remember, I feel like it was a game against the Rockies that ended up being like 14-12. Remember that series against the Rockies where every game was like a 10+ run?
Yeah.
And I do remember him throwing his like 85-mile-an-hour fastball. And then, us talking about how AJ Preller just drafted a player like last year and he immediately came up to the majors. And that ended real quick.
Yeah, it ended incredibly quickly. I remember before the Caratini Martini emojis, there was this whole thing about Margavicic, and I always fuck up his name, whatever. And
it's Margavicic.
Margavicic, and it was like Margs, like having a margarita, like that was the joke. The mark was worth negative 0.1 F4 for his time with the Padres. And finally, I told you we'd come back to him. Tom Cosgrove. Tom Cosgrove is the last major leaguer who's provided value for the Padres so far in this draft. And that goes to show you, by the way, we're talking about 2017 right now. Tom Cosgrove just came up for the Padres. So for drafts, you need to have a big window of time to really see and play out, like, how have these, things, affected the team at the major league level. And I mentioned that I wanted to come back to Tom Cosgrove when the Jacob Nick story came up, because Tom Cosgrove obviously has that amazing sweeper. And, I've always thought one of my favorite phrases in baseball is talking about a slider being a front door or a backdoor slider. Cosgrove has the doggy door slider.
The doggy door slider.
We gotta, he goes down by way of the K, Cosgrove with the doggy door slider. It's there, man. It was there the whole time. I will be trademarking that, penning it. Please feel free to send me any royalty checks in the mail.
I've been stoked with how Tom Cosgrove has performed so far this year, but I think I might like him a little bit less for running away while Jacob Nix gets kicked and tased by a stranger.
That's tough, man. That's really tough. I didn't know that, but I'm so glad I do now. In terms of WAR generated for other teams this year, 2.1 F WAR generated so far. So that's 0.2 generated for the Padres on their 2017 draft, and 2.1 F4 for other teams. And then 1.5 of those 2.1 WAR is Mackenzie Gore, and obviously he's going to generate much, 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 much more for the Nationals or whoever he ends up playing for going forward. And then that last remaining bit is from the aforementioned Nick Margavicic. Before we move on, we're already starting to get into too soon to say territory of like these drafts, because there's a couple players that we haven't mentioned who were drafted. Blake Hunt, who was traded to the Tampa Bay Rays in the Blake Snell trade. He is a catcher who was very young when he was picked, and I believe got injured and is just now getting into AAA after, being drafted in 2017, and he's absolutely tearing it up. He had a great beginning of the season in AA, and I believe he had like a 130 something WRC plus in AA, and he's come to AAA and had like 150 plate appearances and also had like a 120, 130 WRC plus there. So that's one of those things where it's like, right now, the Snell trade looks pretty good on our end. Like Patino hasn't panned out. Yeah. Who knows what the fuck's up with Cole Wilcox? We'll get to him later. But this is a thing where Blake Hunt could come up and then destroy worlds and then et cetera, et cetera. Joey Cantillo is the other name I haven't brought up yet. He is a starting pitcher who was traded to the Guardians in the Clevenger trade, and he is now going to be the Guardians representative in the Futures game coming up shortly after this episode is released in 2023. And he was someone who I pined for when he was a prospect. I was really, really, really excited by him. And I wanted to point out these two prospects because they both went to exactly the right organizations for them. And it's a perfect example of the Padres drafting talent, but not necessarily knowing what to do with it and how to develop it. Whereas, like, if you're a pitcher, there are 3 or 4 organizations that you want to go to, and one of, if not maybe the top organization you want to go to, is Cleveland, because they know how to develop pitchers there, and they have for a decade. We're obviously trying to bring that in with Ruben Niebla, who still has not responded to my LinkedIn request.
No,
I know. We'll start. I'll keep you posted on that. And Blake Hunt, who is going to Tampa Bay and is getting all the advanced player development stuff that they have become to be known for. Before we start talking about the Dodgers, anything you wanted to talk about for this draft for the Padres?
No, I mean, hopefully Mackenzie Gore is good, even if it's not for us, and hopefully Campusano is good for us, but there's a little bit of the AJ Preller gets a break because he drafts almost exclusively high school players. Like, there's so many high school players that were drafted in this draft, and so obviously those are more in like the 5-year range, which is right around now when they start to contribute. But I don't know, there's just there's more of an excuse basically when you draft high school players that maybe I need a decade in order to really see how these things work out.
Shall we discuss the 2017 Dodgers?
Yeah, they sucked. Go Padres!
Go Padres! We did it. Mission accomplished.
We beat them
Look
in
at the banner.
Yeah, we beat them in 2017. We did. They had. I mean, it's funny because they went almost exclusively college players in this draft. Their first pick in the draft, like their first pick was Jaron Kendall, and he has been terrible, and he's not anything. So they ended up getting 0.1 WAR, mostly off of Andre Jackson. And then they ended up trading 0.3 WAR, which means they both didn't generate value for themselves, nor did they generate value for anyone else in the 2017 draft. Stamp it. We beat them in 2017.
It's over. It's Jover.
It's Jover.
Unfortunately not. We do have to go forward and talk about many more drafts. 2018, this was the Ryan Weathers draft, the large adult son draft. Ryan Weathers, the 7th pick overall in that draft, a lefty out of high school in Tennessee. And, again, like I said, we're starting to get into sort of too soon to say territory. But some other names that you may recognize from this draft that the Padres took. Xavier Edwards, erstwhile Padres prospect who landed in Tampa Bay and I believe now is in the Marlins organization.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And so he is kind of a, spray, no pop, contact.
He is the slapdick prospect.
He's the slapdick prospect, of course. How could I forget? He was the slapdick prospect that went to Tampa Bay in the Pham and Renfroe trade, right? That was that trade.
Yes, it was.
And then Snell ended up being hoisted by his own petard and coming right to us. Owen Miller, a name you'll recognize in the Cleveland Guardians organization. He was part of the Clevenger trade. And also a name you'll recognize, Steven Wilson. Steven Wilson was taken in the 8th round, the 231st overall pick, our 5-star Uber driver. And in terms of WAR generated for the Padres this year, it's been less than 1, 0.9 FWAR, 0.1 coming from Ryan Weathers, first round pick. Steven Wilson, it is positive. Steven Wilson has 0.9 FWAR. And if you're thinking, wait, Raphie, that adds up to 1, how do they have less than a full win? Well, Reese Kinnear. Reese Kinnear was also taken in this draft, and he put up negative 0.1, and that's actually not... I put this list together before the game that happened in Pittsburgh, so it's probably worse.
It's negative 0.3 now.
Oh, negative 0.3. All right.
He has a 15.88 ERA, in case you were wondering.
All right, so update the tallies, John. 0.7 F4 generated from this draft for the Padres. And for other teams, it's been 1.7. Most of that coming from Owen Miller playing for the Guardians. Xavier Edwards has generated a little bit. And also one Dylan Coleman, right-handed pitcher, has generated 0.6 F4 elsewhere. Any thoughts on this one, John?
I mean, it's too soon to say. I agree. However, it's not too soon to say that it's pretty, like, it's unlikely that none of these prospects are highly rated. You know, right. Steven Wilson's going to put up some numbers. Xavier Edwards has fallen off the prospect. Maybe he'll be like a, comeback kind of prospect, but it was a bad draft. Like we got Steven Wilson, and hopefully Ryan Weathers is good someday.
Yeah. And I mean, like, I'm just going to take us into the Dodgers thing really quickly because there's not a ton to talk about, but 2018 is kind of the last year where we could say if there were an impact player in this draft class, they should have made some sort of impact by now, like in some way, shape, or form. So like if Weathers was going to be that guy for us, it would have happened by now. And I know he's still young. I know he was a high school pitcher. I know he's like 24 probably at this point. Like it's, people can change, people can be like, and it can improve, et cetera, et cetera. But in the Dodgers 2018 draft class, there were only 2 people so far who have made the major leagues, but one of whom is James Outman. James Outman, who was taken in the 7th round, so 224th overall, college bat, has since slowed down, but got off to a scorching start to begin the 2023 campaign and has put up 2.1 F4. And, Michael Grove was taken ahead of him in the 2nd round, and he's generated negative 0.1 F4 in like, a cup of coffee appearances and got knocked around a little bit. But I think it was against the Yankees. I think I was actually at that game. And,
oh, wow. Nice.
But he is still correct me if I'm wrong, 50 or 55 overall prospect.
No, 40 plus.
40 plus. Well, yeah, no wonder he got knocked around a little bit. That's okay. But he's a depth guy. He's a depth guy for them in their organization. So he's someone who the Padres do not have, which is a true depth piece. So let's move right along to 2019. John, you want to take us through who the Padres took in 2019?
Yeah, 2019 was the year in which there was like 6 players that were the like standout draft picks in 2019, and we drafted 6th overall, which meant that we were basically just going to draft whichever of those 6 ended up falling to us. And the one that ended up falling to us was CJ Abrams, and so we basically just picked that guy, which is good. I mean, he ended up being, a top prospect, and we'll see how he ends up playing. But I mean, the guys right below him were like Nick Lodolo, if I remember. Josh Jung, Shea Langelier. So like you could have picked any of those guys, and they'll probably be pretty good. CJ Abrams had the highest ceiling. We went with CJ Abrams, and then we also got Mears, who is, was exciting about his exit velocities, but is still terrible at this point. Logan Driscoll was exciting for a second, traded him to the Rays. Hudson Head actually ended up giving us some value. We traded him before his like star prospect, like how he was perceived, ended up falling off a cliff. But at the time we went under slot on some picks to be able to sign Hudson Head to like I think it was like $3 million or something like that. It was way above what he was supposed to be getting in the 3rd round. And then we also got Matt Brash, immediately traded him as well, and now he looks very, very promising for a different team, and he's put up 1.8 F4 for them, and probably will put up a lot more as things go. But like you said, this is like early on, so who knows how these people will end up performing. But it is 4 years ago, so I mean, Abrams, what is he now? He's put up negative 0.1 F4 for us, and then negative 0.2 F4 for the Nats. He'll probably improve. He's still very, very young. But as a whole, this draft class as a whole, you see a couple names that you're even considering could be good at this point. And those are like CJ Abrams. I'd say that Josh Mears' star has kind of fallen a lot. Hudson Heads has fallen a lot. And then Matt Brash, we don't know what he is, but we know that he has nasty stuff. But, I mean, for the most part, it's Abrams and Matt Brash, and we'll see what happens with those guys.
Yeah, Matt Brash, of course, the player to be named later in the Austin Nola trade, which I love. It it's the best. It's the kicker of that trade for me, because like not only did you give away France and Munoz and like all these guys, but then at the end they were like, oh yeah, and also throw in this guy who has like an insane, wicked, nasty breaking balls, like otherworldly stuff. Remains to be seen if he can be consistent. But the Padres from this draft class so far in 2019, negative 0.1 F4, courtesy of CJ Abrams. And for other teams, they have given up 1.6 F4, mainly on the back of Matt Brash's 1.8. CJ Abrams, of course, putting up negative WAR in Washington so far in his time there. John, 2019 Dodgers, what was going on?
It's mostly, I mean, they're kind of the opposite of us. We keep going high school players and they keep going college players, which means that their players develop quicker. But it's also because there's only so many teams, I think, both in college and high school, that have like StatCast data or just TrackMan data or whatever kind of Hawkeye data, whatever kind of data. And the Dodgers seem to like to draft players with data so that they know like what's the spin rate of the guy that I'm getting to mitigate risk. And so they ended up getting Michael Busch, Ryan Pepio, and then some other guys that are lower on the future value rankings. But Michael Busch currently has a 50 future value ranking, which is the same as Will Smith or Tony Gonsolin when they graduated. And given the resources that the Dodgers seem to spend on player development, is one of those players that makes me a little bit nervous that he might be good. Ryan Pepio, 45, future value, gonna contribute at some point. It was another probably solid, but we'll see kind of draft.
Yeah. So we're just gonna move along now, mainly because now we're at 2020, and really none of the players going forward have made any sort of major league footprint yet, even for the Dodgers. So we're just going to kind of speed through and talk about some of the notable prospects who were taken. 2020 was an abbreviated draft. Of course, it was the COVID year. The Padres, I'll just read. There were 6 picks that the Padres made that year. I'll just read them off right now. Robert Hassel, Justin Lang, Owen Casey, Cole Wilcox, Levi Thomas, and Jagger Haynes. Robert Hassel, of course, was part of the Juan Soto trade that went to the Nationals organization, and his stock has fallen mightily since we traded him. And that's one of the examples in which we kind of talk about why you trade prospects for major league talent. He is a prime piece of evidence for the thesis behind the way that AJ Preller has built teams, which is essentially like, sure, like, one of these guys could turn into Juan Soto theoretically, but they could also turn into nobody, and Juan Soto is Juan Soto. So, that's why you trade for a major league already pre-finished talent. Justin Lang, he was traded to New York, the Yankees, in the Voit trade. And he has since been, for them. He's a 35 plus future value prospect. So that was a name that, we drafted him and then pretty quickly sent him away. And I don't think anyone really felt none the wiser. Owen Casey and Cole Wilcox, the next 2 names, interesting. So Owen Casey was sent away in the Darvish trade when he was like still wearing diapers, basically. He was like 17, 18 years old, or 18 years. I mean, he was
out of Canada too, right? I think he was out of Canada too.
I don't know. Yeah, you're right. Burlington, Ontario. And he's currently in AA for the Cubs and is crushing. Is doing a great job. He's a 50 future value outfielder. So he's doing well. And then Cole Wilcox, who we mentioned in the Snell trade, he's in Tampa Bay. He had Tommy John pretty quickly after the trade. And again, it was one of those things where it's like, oh, that trade looks so great. Well, he's a 45 future value pitcher now, and he's doing okay. So, we'll see. We'll see in the long run. So we can move along to the Dodgers really quickly, but anything notable for the Padres there?
Until you put this on the document, I didn't notice how well he's doing. I mean, he's a 20-year-old, or Owen Casey, I'm referring to. He's a 20-year-old who's putting up a 134 WRC plus in AA, so he's on the precipice of the MLB. He's got like a 509 slug, 13 homers. At 20 years old, that's pretty impressive. It's actually one of our more impressive draft picks, I would say.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, if he
based on where they were
continues,
drafted.
he continues on that trajectory, I think by the end of 2024, we could see him in the major leagues, coming up has like an end of the year call up. So keep an eye on that going forward. For the Dodgers this year, Bobby Miller, who has come up to the major leagues and has put up just under 1 win worth of value above replacement. He is a 55 future value prospect as pitcher. So he's, one of their premier prospects. Other notable
That's the same
guys,
as Walker Buehler when he graduated. Walker
Precisely.
Buehler graduated with a 55 future value. Just so everybody knows, if he ends up being good, like, he'll be good for cheap for a while.
Exactly. Yeah, and just a reminder for folks, if anyone has a 60 future value valuation or above, they're being put into like this is a borderline all-star, projection.
Yeah.
So 55 is just under that, and that's someone who's going to be like really good all the time. That's like it's better than an everyday starter, maybe not quite an all-star, but a very solid player is what their projection is. Landon Knack, a 40 future value starting pitcher, and of course Gavin Stone, who was selected in the final round in the 6th round for them, the 5th round out of Central Arkansas. So again, that is just like you were saying, John, the Dodgers taking the college route while we take the high school route. And it is paying dividends for them in this sense. 2021. All right. This is where the tide starts to maybe turn a little bit question mark in this story, where we start to see AJ Preller really, to his credit, like have an amazing draft, a truly amazing draft so far. I mean, from what we know so far, for the Padres, in the 1st round, he selected Jackson Merrill, who, as I had just mentioned, 60 future value prospect right now. He's currently Fangraphs number 8 overall prospect. In the 2nd round, he selected James Wood, not Woods. James Wood, who was again a high school outfielder.
Love James Woods.
Is that a Family Guy reference?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You can't get anything past me. James Wood played at IMG Academy, which if you want to go down a nice big Google rabbit hole, Google the IMG Academy. Fucking crazy shit happening down there in Florida. But he was someone who was a very controversial pick because he's ginormous and people were like, he's never going to be able to consistently hit. He's going to strike out a ton. Is he going to be too big? And so far, tough to be the haters and the losers because he's not only a 60 future value prospect, but number 6 overall. Of course, he is now in the Washington Nationals organization as he was the centerpiece in the Juan Soto trade, and he is fucking destroying worlds in the minor leagues. So, again, you make that trade 100 times out of 100, in my humble opinion. It's fucking Juan Soto. It's Juan Soto. It's Juan Soto. I still feel that way. Some other people of note in that trade, Robert Gasser, starting pitcher, who went back to Milwaukee in the Josh Hader trade. He's a 45 future value. Kevin Kopps, 35 plus future value. He was a pitcher for Arkansas who won the Golden Spikes Award when he was in college, and he's someone who I've kind of been waiting to. When he was drafted, it was like he might play for the Padres this year, and we still haven't seen him. Jackson Wolf, also kind of hanging out down there in the minors, potentially turning some heads. And I saved him for last. John. River Ryan. Not the name of an old gunslinger in the West, but in fact, a starting pitcher who was traded to the Dodgers. He's a 45 future value prospect now. So we had to have gotten something good for him, right? Right?
No, we did not. We did not. We got the previously mentioned negative 0.7 WAR from Matt Beatty. This is the most frustrating one, and we'll go into like just at the end is where like I think the meat of the podcast is, where we really break things down in terms of like how much total value we've got from our players versus how much total value the Dodgers have got from their players. But this is so frustrating. This was the most frustrating because one, it's a trade between the Padres and Dodgers, so it's like who's gonna win it, and we drafted River Ryan as a two-way player, and at the time, it's so frustrating. It's almost funny. We at the time he was a 22-year-old, and we put him into like the Arizona League, and at the time we put him in as a hitter, and he had a 104 WRC plus, which is obviously above average by 4%. However, not above average when you're a 22-year-old playing against primarily like 18 to 20-year-olds, right? And so he wasn't a very good hitter at the time in 2021 for the Padres. And so the Dodgers, who seems like might be based on our draft so far, except for 2017 when we smoked their asses, in my opinion, by 2 wars or whatever, might be a little bit better at talent evaluation. Traded for him for Matt Beatty, who did negative -0.7 WAR for us, with the idea that he's not a hitter, he's a pitcher. His talent is going to be way better used as a pitcher. And immediately, as soon as he got to the Dodgers, he was sitting 94 to 97, touching 99, and from his age 23 and 24 seasons in low A, high A, and now double A, never had an ERA above 270, always had a K per 9 above 9.9, like immediately, and now he's like a 4.5, 45 overall prospect who has a sweeping slider that reaches 90 miles per hour and can touch the high 90s, and is probably going to be a good player for them going forward. We didn't even have him at the right position.
Yeah. So I want to give credit to one Tevin McReynolds. I hope you're listening, Tevin. I'm shouting you out. He did say immediately that we were going to regret this and that the Dodgers were going to turn him into someone, blah, blah. Now, I will kind of buffer this a little bit by saying, like, if a dooming clock is right twice a day, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, it's like
when you're a Padres fan, it's right most of the time.
It's right most of the time. But like, if your disposition is that bad shit's going to happen and then something bad happens, you do look very prescient. He did call this. So kudos to Tevin, for that. And, for the Dodgers, this is where they didn't have as good of a draft as us, not anywhere close to as good of a draft as us. They had a couple of 45 future value pitchers in Maddox Bruns and Nick Nastrini, and then some 40 future value and 35 plus future value guys. But you are seeing a strategy, which is I'm looking at their draft chart, and all of their players who signed, except for one in this draft, were pitchers. All of the Dodgers selections from the 2021 draft, outside of Damon Keith in the 18th round, were pitchers. And I bring that up because there is common parlance of tin snap. There's no such an abbreviation for there's no such thing as a pitching prospect. And when I look at the Padres farm, I kind of often tell myself that, and I think about the fact that we've like traded away Mackenzie Gore and traded away other talented pitchers and Joey Cantillo and like all these people. And it's like, yeah, but these guys their elbow could explode tomorrow and there's no such thing as a pitching prospect. And I think what we are seeing from the Dodgers is a recognition of that and saying, okay, yes, half of these guys might explode tomorrow, but half of them won't. So if we just pick 17 of them, then surely like a couple of them are going to pan out. And that's, like I said, when we talked about Walker Buehler, all it takes is one. All it takes is one of these guys hitting. And when you have the Dodgers player development and you have the resources and the coaching and the tools and everything that you need, they are the ones who can take these, wet pieces of clay and mold them into something beautiful.
Looking at this, there's only two of, it was the first two, but it was only two that are high school pitchers. I would be very curious to know whether those high schools that they went to, like UMS Wright Prep, that sounds like a rich school. They probably have some kind of TrackMan data. You know what I mean? I bet that there's some kind of like spin rate, pitch shape, some kind of data that came out. I mean, that would already be around, but I would bet that there's some kind of data that came out at some point that made them be like, we got to get 20 of these guys, and with whatever trade it is, and 5 to 10 of them are going to pan out. This is going to be a good draft to look back on in like 2-3 years to see if any of these guys popped.
Yeah. So we're going to round out. We've come to the final year. For the Padres in 2022, their first round pick, we've talked about him before, Dylan Lesko. He was roundly considered the best high school arm, but he had Tommy John surgery. So it was a question of if anyone was going to, take the risk. And the Padres were picking at 15 that year, and they took that risk, and they drafted Dylan Lesko. And he hasn't yet pitched outside of like complex league simulated games, I believe. But everyone who's seen him,
no, he's had 2 starts, and they were like 1 inning, and like yesterday he had another one that was he has like a 27 ERA or something like that. But he's just coming back.
Yeah. But so far, Matt Friars and a few other people have talked about looking pretty good. The second round pick, Robbie Snelling, who of course is in Lake Elsinore. Did he get promoted to Fort Wayne?
He just was promoted like 2 days ago.
Yes. So
from when we're recording,
half of a season in Lake Elsinore, led that league in a bunch of pitching categories. He's looking probably like the strongest pitcher in the Cal League. Really exciting stuff to see what will happen with him going forward. And by that, I mean, he's going to be traded for controllable pitching at some point. Some others, Adam Mazer, Henry Williams, and a bunch of other folks who we are just going to have to wait and see on. But that was the Padres 2022 draft. And
by the way, Henry Williams was also post Tommy John. So we did a twofer on Dylan Lesko and Henry Williams in terms of folks that probably would have been drafted a little higher, but had Tommy John surgery recently.
Yeah. 2022, the Dodgers, they did not have a first round pick. They took Dalton Rushing with their second round pick, their first pick in the draft, 40th overall. He's a catcher out of Louisville, and he's already ranked as a 45 future value prospect. Not that they need any more catching prospects. But and that's really kind of the only notable pick so far. So we've come to the portion of the podcast where we're going to kind of look at these 2 teams at a 30,000 foot view over the course of the AJ Preller era and paint a picture that I think, John, really opened my eyes. I
did not expect these results. I really didn't.
So basically, I took all of the data that we've laid out for you so far, and I wanted to put them into 2 different buckets, 2 different metrics. And the first is what I call the talent delta, and the second is the value delta. Now, the talent delta, all that is how much have the players from each of these 2 teams, how much WAR have they generated in their time in the majors for the Padres, for the Dodgers, for any other teams? Just how much WAR have they generated, just to purely look at how do these 2 teams evaluate talent on the draft board, and try and with the crystal ball look into the future. And the delta, of course, is the difference between the 2. So the Padres from 2015 to 2020, which is where we decided to cut this off because there's no other players that have really contributed at the major league level from 2021 or 2022. So from 2015 to 2020, the Padres and AJ Preller have grossed 38.9 FWAR total from their draft picks. The Dodgers have grossed 54.3 FWAR. That is a talent delta of 16.4, John. How does that sound? How does that land for you?
It sounds gross. You picked the right word. It's gross. That's gross.
Yeah. Not as gross as what I'm about to tell you, though. So that second metric that I had, I labeled the value delta. Now, the value delta is how much WAR do these players generate for your team? And then if you had draft picks that generated WAR for other teams, I'm going to penalize you for that. I'm going to subtract that from the WAR that you got. So there's a couple things to note. Obviously, if you traded away a lot of value, you are going to be penalized for that. But also, if you traded away negative value, you get a boost. Because, John, what happens when you subtract from a negative?
You get a positive.
You add it. That's right. It is the opposite of an opposite. Okay. So the Padres net WAR from 2015 to 2020 is negative 21.4. Okay. So given all the WAR that they've generated, okay, given all of that, in terms of their draft picks, they have netted, compared to their team versus other teams, negative 21.4 F4. The Dodgers, on the other hand, have generated 42.3 net F4 from their draft picks. So remember, they grossed 54.3. So even with all the stuff they've traded away, which is not nothing, they have still netted 42.3. That means the value delta between these two squads is 67.4 F4. That is one Hall of Fame career. Like, that is a Hall of Fame career worth of talent and value.
It's also just worth like $670 million or so, you know? And you could argue, oh yeah, but we traded those players for major league value, and it's like, we did for sure, but like the Soto trade basically hasn't got the Nationals any, you know what I mean? So it's like basically the Snell trade, the Nola trade, and the Clevenger trade were kind of like our major trades in that era. Oh no, Joe Musgrove and Yu Darvish, but those prospects haven't matured quite yet.
Yeah. So you know, again, to really get the full picture, we would have to then say, okay, but what value did you get? You know, in return, you know, Musgrove obviously has been good for us. Darvish has been good for us, et cetera, et cetera. But this is a point that we also want to hit upon, which is that when you're trading prospects for major league talent, just from a pure quantity standpoint, you are trading a higher number of prospects than you are receiving number of major league ready players. And if you do that constantly, it does create a depth issue. Because the quantity of quality that you have, to sound kind of oxymoronic, the quantity of quality. Yeah, the quantity of quality that you have is so much lower. And it's why in the week that we're recording this episode, we needed 2 spot starts to be made, and we had to bring up Reese Kinnear and Matt Waldron. Again, Waldron Cauldron, founding member, very happy about that. But these are non-prospects. These guys don't show up on any prospect list, and for a reason. They're, quad A sort of guys. There is no, Bobby Miller. There is no, Michael Grove or anyone to call up that the Dodgers have as essentially a stopgap of their roster, which is comprised not only of developed pieces, but also Mookie Betts and Freddie Freeman and other, guys who have been brought into the organization. So, go ahead.
And we have made positive trades, but like you could put together the like Snell, Darvish, Musgrove. Those are kind of like the pitching trades, I guess, have been the more positive ones. I don't think that they have been worth a positive of 67.4 F4.
Yeah. So, John, you did something super interesting and eye-opening to me, which I was not expecting, which was, looking at how the value generated from our drafts compares to everyone in Major League Baseball from 2015 to 2020. And I've rarely been shocked on this show before, but this shocked me. So please, can you share with us what you have discovered?
Yeah, so I had to use B-War because it was just the easier mechanism by which to search. It's just the easier one. Yeah. Baseball Reference is much easier to kind of navigate than Fangraphs, although I don't agree with their WAR quite as much. But it's close. Like we just elucidated from F-WAR that their gross was 38.9 versus for the Padres versus 54.3 for the Dodgers, and the B-War is right in line with that. They say the Padres have generated 39.6 versus the Dodgers 58.5, which, by the way, 39.3 of which was in one single year, that 2016 year when they got Lux, May, Smith, Gonsolin, etc.
Insane.
39 point. That's almost as much as we've generated so far. In the AJ Preller era, we've generated 39.6 B-War, and they generated 39.3, 0.3 fewer in one single year. And that would have been more had they signed Bailey Ober or Graham Ashcraft, who they also signed that year, but didn't end up, or who they also drafted but didn't end up signing. They drafted 17 major league players in 2016. 17 major league players in 2016. That's almost a roster of players all in one draft. That's crazy. But anyway, so 58.5 F4 in just our division alone. The Diamondbacks are also ahead of us in that time at 47.3 F4. Like I said, we're at 39.6. And then the Giants are 16 behind us at 23.9. The Rockies are sad at the bottom at 12.6. They do not know how to draft at all. But just going across the MLB, I didn't do every single team, although you find a pattern and it ends up being that we're somewhere around like 10th overall in how much B-WAR we've generated from 2015 to 2020, which I expected to be higher. But I just did mostly like competitive teams who you would think would be, who are trying to vie for playoff spots against us. Most of them actually had less draft capital than we did. And, we ended up kind of right smack dab in the middle of like smart teams. The Cardinals ended up generating 88.1 B-WAR. 88.1 B-WAR in that time, which obviously dwarfs our 39.6 B-WAR over that span. And not only that, but they've done it very consistently. It's like every single year they get like about 10 B-WAR, and then sometimes somebody pops a little bit and it'll be more close to 15 or 20, which is kind of how our drafts have been. We've had we've had major league players, but maybe they haven't generated quite as much value. Whereas the Cardinals get a bunch of major league players, but most of them end up generating like 10 WAR, And then the Astros had 85.4. They were in second place. That was mostly generated on one draft in which they got Alex Bregman and Kyle Tucker. So that was just like a 60 F WAR or B WAR draft alone. But then like the Rays are ahead of us at 58.6. Guardians are ahead of us at 51.9. Braves are ahead of us at 50.2. And then the Jays are kind of right in line with us at 36.3. Orioles just below us at 34.3. And then the Brewers are kind of in line with us at 32.3. And then the teams that are kind of in our like competitive range but have done poorly are the Phillies at 14.2, Yankees at 17.2, and then the Mets at 20.0. So we have outperformed some teams, but I was so much expecting, given the quantity of major league players that we've kind of like had come through our system and then traded around, to have one of the higher B-WAR teams. And it turns out that we're like in the mid-range among competitive teams, and then maybe in the slightly above average range among like across the MLB, which this is the thing that I thought that AJ Preller was the best at, was drafting talent that would make it to the major leagues. And he has had a lot of players, but not really a lot of value that have ended up, succeeding at the major league level.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that that's one of those things where this narrative is actually pretty recent of him being, like a draft wizard. The farm obviously was very strong, from 2017, 2018, 2019, but a lot of that was on the back of international signings. And so, thinking about, how we draft, I had like just kind of always assumed, like you said, that like we would have been in the top five, and to find out that we're actually like kind of mid at drafting, and again, we'll have to see. We'll have to come back in another 5 years and see how James Wood is doing and how Jackson Merrill is doing, and all these people who
I guess, but by then Bueller will have put up way more F-WAR, like Lux will have put up way more like May, Tucker, everybody that has put up a lot of WAR will then have put up more WAR. So like, are we going to catch up to anybody? They're going to have to be like superstars in order to catch up to any of these teams that are ahead of us.
Yeah, no kidding. So I don't know what to make of this, dude. Like, seriously, like I'm kind of at a loss, because I'm like, why the fuck is he here then? Like when I say I'm like AJ, you know what I mean? Like it's like I don't know. That's probably
you don't
really
even understand
harsh.
how unfair this comparison is to the Dodgers. This is so unfair. Like in this era in which we were comparing these teams, we had 5 top 10 picks. They had 0. We had 6 top 20 picks. They had 0. We had like one time that we didn't have a first round pick. They had 3 times.
Yeah.
And yet we're 20 WAR behind them. And we had compensation picks because we didn't pay enough play enough players. So we had a comp A pick every other year and a comp B pick every other year, and still we're 20 WAR behind the Dodgers, and 50 WAR behind the Cardinals, 50 WAR behind the Astros.
Yeah. So okay, this is what I should have said, and I want to take back what I said. Why the fuck is he here? He is good at drafting. 39.6 B WAR is not anything to sneeze at. You just like it's like top 10
it's
in the league.
Average.
It's above average. It's above average. Hey, we're drafting above average. You know what I mean? But this is what I wanted to say, and this is the last thing I have to say because I don't really have much else to say about this. If you want to know why people are constantly harping on player development, this is why. When player development becomes a buzzword for people and becomes like, you get so sick of hearing like, oh, the Dodgers and the Rays and the Guardians, they all have this player development programs. Why do people keep talking about this? Like, we signed all these people who are good and blah, blah, blah. This is why. Because not only do they provide you value, they provide you a foundation. They provide you depth. And it's not just about the money. It's not just about the money because we're in a environment as Padres fans where money has actually mattered the least that it's ever mattered before. We've just gone out and handed these giant contracts to people. But where's the depth? You know what I mean? Like that's like when people talk, I'm just looking at this list that you put together of like the Braves and the Guardians and the Rays and the Dodgers and the Astros and the Cardinals. When I think of these teams, I think of depth. I think of, wow, this guy came out of nowhere and he became this type of person and now he's contributing to this team at this level. Like, how did he do that? And it's kind of like I see AJ's purpose, but he's not meant to be running the entire show.
Yeah.
And even if he wants to be general manager, fine. He needs a president of baseball operations. Making that was the mistake. It's not necessarily it's that he has to answer to no one. He has no counterweight to the method to his madness. And I don't think I'm saying anything new here, but I do think that the data that we've presented over the last hour is, I wouldn't want to say new, like people have talked about this, but like, I think we're putting it together.
I didn't expect it.
I wasn't expecting it at all.
Yeah.
And it kind of backs up a lot of the sentiments and the kind of just feelings in our gut that I've had, which is that we're in shaky territory as an organization. So that's what I have to say, John. Any final thoughts before we get out of here?
Just that you're spotting the Dodgers 20 were like $200+ million in terms of value while drafting at least 20 spots lower than them every year and you get a comp pick and they don't get a comp pick. At some point you got to be like, there's haves and have-nots in terms of like resources in the MLB and how they spend it on player development, and probably in terms of how they spend it on like draft, like capitalizing on drafts. And it seems like we're a very, very good have-not. That's what it feels like to me. It's like we're a tremendous scouting team that is not taking advantage of, the grouping of value that we have.
Well,
and I want to be a have. In order to win a World Series, you have to be a have, I think.
Well, I hope this wasn't too sour a note to leave our little mini break on. I hope you remember this show fondly.
For positivity.
While we're in our little summer recess. And we hope you all have enjoyed the show. We especially hope you joined us on YouTube to check out some of what we had to say and some of what we had to show you visually. So thank you again, once again, for subscribing, for leaving comments below, telling us what you think, and for telling friends about the show. You know, we've had some people come and find us and DM us and say some very nice things. And we really do appreciate it, because I can't speak for John, but my ego needs it, and I really appreciate that. So
I appreciate it too.
Without further ado, I'm going to gavel this here episode to a close. AJ Preller, he's all right at drafting. He's pretty good. He's
He's above average.
He's above average. Cool. For John Precoda, I'm Raphie Cantor. This has been another episode of Pods of Replacement, and we will see you next time.